Thank you for joining me today for another episode of Hunger Hunt Feast. Today, I just want to have a little conversation. I know it's one-sided. It's how it works with podcasts, but at least in this case, this week. But finding our personal nuance on an animal-based diet. So, as we are essentially carnivorous omnivores, generally, we can eat both plants and animals, but we tend to do better and tend to gravitate towards historically animal foods as our basis, with plant foods filling in gaps or used to add some variety or the meat isn't present. But generally speaking, historically, hunter-gatherer tribes, there's always some sort of meat, fish, bird, whatever it was available in the area that provided a tremendous amount of the nutrition. Now, many people come to, say, a purely carnivore diet, or even to a keto diet with no carb. Obviously, those are very different diets, but they're both at the extreme ends of a diet, okay, or of a way of eating. But they come to the carnivore keto out of a desire to resolve a condition or find healing. Sometimes it's just balance out hormones or get aggressive about losing weight. It might be to reduce inflammation. Now, clearly, humans are omnivores because we can make fuel and absorb needed protein from both animals and plants. Again, as I said before, depending on what was available. But we're able to get needed macronutrients, so vitamins, minerals, other nutrients like choline and so forth that are the majority of those micronutrients from animal-based sources, and much easier than from plant sources, while eating less food. We can eat less animal-based foods and get the majority of those nutrients, those micronutrients, and definitely all of the macronutrients we need. The protein and fat, with the benefit of being able to convert dietary protein to glucose as needed for glycogen under the regulation of the liver. Now, to get protein from plants, we have to obviously eat a lot more plants, right? A lot more plants, a lot more food, whether it's nuts or some sort of leafy vegetation, if that's even a good source, beans, that kind of thing. We have to eat a lot more of it to get the same level of quality protein, get those amino acids that we need. But we can do it in a pinch. Our bodies will digest those, not as well as from an animal-based source, okay? But it's possible, and that's why we're technically omnivores, but much more naturally carnivorous, because it's so much easier to get those nutrients from animal-based sources. So, and those nutrients for animal-based sources are just more bioavailable in our gut. So in digestion, it's just better quality in forms that we can use without having to convert it. Like, for instance, vitamin A as retinol from animal-based sources like liver, right? Great source of vitamin A already in the retinol form, rather than beta carotene, which comes from a lot of plants, like typical carrots, right? And we have to convert that beta carotene. Maybe the best of us, those who can convert it the best, might convert 30% of the beta carotene we eat to retinol, vitamin A. Some of us can't convert it at all, or much smaller amounts. Whereas if you're eating vitamin A as retinol from an animal source, there's no conversion needed. You get to use that as all that much more bioavailable. Heme iron, rather than iron comes from a plant, the heme iron from an animal, much more needed and available to us. B vitamins, obviously. B12 actually only coming from animal foods, but many more B vitamins from animal-based foods. Choline, as I mentioned before, for brain health. We don't absorb much cholesterol from our food, maybe 10 to 20%. The liver makes the rest. But we use that cholesterol to make vitamin D, sex hormones, cortisol, cell membranes for pretty much every cell in the body. Now they make their own, the ones from the liver usually end up in the blood and being transported as needed But every other cell makes their own, you know, cholesterol for cell membrane, and the brain makes its own cholesterol. So we want, though, if we're going to eat it, we want animal-based cholesterol, not phytosterols from plants. We don't want phytosterols in our cell membranes, because plants don't have cell membranes; they have cell walls, right? So we don't want sterols that make cell walls when we're trying to make cell membranes they're much more permeable, that are made up of cholesterol, animal cholesterol. I did an episode on the podcast about nutritional benefits of an animal-based diet. If you want to see more on that, it's actually episode 71. It's called What I'm Eating and Why. I go into the nutrient density of animal-based foods. I also did on episode 70, right before that, I covered the health risks and benefits really coming from studies, okay, of an animal-based diet, and looked at what the studies say about that. But as far as the nutrient density of foods, if you want a little more on that, check out episode 71. Since I don't want to go down that rabbit hole on this episode, but plants are not benign. Okay, they are not without resistance to digestion. They have lectins, oxalates, phytates, tannins, depending on the plant. They have a different combination of those, or different amounts of those, right? Traditionally, hunter-gatherer groups would ferment plants as well as meat. They fermented a number of things depending on the group, the hunter-gatherer tribe. But the fermentation reduced the potency of those anti-nutrients in the plants, essentially like removing the horns of the plant through fermentation. And you still see this in Asia, where people are, where they typically ferment soy. Now, a lot of us would, in this animal-based community, would avoid soy at all costs, but they ferment the soy to reduce the negative effects from the soy and the digestive issues that are often caused by eating a lot of soy. We see a lot of, there's a lot of obviously bacterial benefits from fermentation to help with digestion, to help build the biome. And it seems like the hunter-gatherer tribe just learned to do this through trial and error. But many times they fermented these plant foods actually in the stomach or the intestines of an animal they had just killed, or that they, sometimes they actually fermented the food that the animal had eaten in its own gut. So if the food was the animal was obviously eating plants, usually an herbivore, and they would ferment the grasses and so forth and whatever plants they had in its gut. They left them in the stomach, let them ferment in there, added heat, put them to the ground, depending where they were, whether in Australia, Africa, the natives of North America, South America, and I think even the South Pacific, but the Asians obviously ferment a lot of foods. And we see in Iceland, I think they average about 3 cups of fermented food per day. Average Icelander, they still ferment a lot of their food. Fish, blueberries, mushrooms, any plants they might have. They ferment a lot of their foods. It's better for digestion. You get the bacterial benefits of the biome. It's just the way they've done things. It's more traditional. It's more in their traditional. They've held on to more of the traditional way that their people ate. So in other words, the way we eat plants now, typically, whether it's raw or just steamed, a lot of times cooked with little or no fat. Okay, so I'm talking about traditionally, maybe not the way you do it. Often, mostly unfermented. It's not how most hunter-gatherers ate vegetation or grains or even nuts and seeds. They used to ferment nuts and seeds as well. Definitely soak them, sprout them, but then they often fermented them. Bread was fermented, if they made anything like bread. This would, again, to disable the anti-nutrients that can cause gut inflammation and keep us from assimilating the nutrients that are in those plants. So again, as I mentioned before, many people come to keto carnivore to overcome a condition. Now, it could be like 2 weeks ago, I had Dr. Diane Placido Torres, who had overcome a condition of PCOS, as well as other, which of course insulin driven, as well as other inflammation markers, autoimmune markers that she had in her blood work, and she was able to reverse all those, reverse the PCOS and remove the inflammation and autoimmune markers that were coming up in her blood work. All gone through an animal-based diet. Like, she really eats little to no plant food whatsoever. It would upset her stomach. She'd had acid reflux from the time she was a small child, like a toddler, and the PCOS at 19, 20 years old-ish, and struggled with it, treated traditionally with hormones for over 10 years, until she finally went low carb intermittent fasting and was able to bring her insulin levels down, which allowed her other hormones, to her progesterone and estrogen, to balance out. Last week we had Tamsin Murphy, who, severe digestive issues, ulcerative colitis at some point, where she had to be hospitalized, and has gone to pretty much as a result of needing the healing. Okay, and doing a lot of research, because she's a researcher in nutrition, researcher and registered dietitian, but needing the healing of an elimination diet consisting mainly of, or only of, animal foods. That's what Tamsin has to eat: pretty much all animal food, maybe meat-based, and maybe a little bit of fermented dairy to help with digestion. Almost no vegetable at all. Occasionally a little fruit, but very limited diet. And she feels so much better. They both feel much better on it. They've reduced their symptoms, reduced their inflammation, and they just feel great. That's worth paying attention to. That's worth, even if that kind of level of diet seems odd to you, or seems like you're missing out on something, they're missing out on their on the lifestyle diseases that they were struggling with. That's what they're missing out on. What they've gained from it is healing, and they're still in that process. And whether they are able to eat other foods somewhere in their life down the line, who knows? Who knows what healing takes? We can't prejudge that. It may happen, but for now, this is what's allowing them to live a normal life, when they went 10 plus years, each of them, struggling with the PCOS, with Diane, or the severe digestive issues with Tamsin. They need the healing of an elimination diet, and it resolved their symptoms, and that's all they care about. Yes, they're getting the nutrition they need. They're eating balanced. They're eating organ meats, and eating, in a way to get them the micronutrients that they need. They're both very well educated in that as well. So, but when the results show up on a blood test in the form of reduced blood sugar and insulin levels, or reduced inflammatory markers and autoimmune markers, reduced inflammation in the gut, you can't really argue with that. I had Rebecca Farmer on episode 41, who was in her 20s, weighed 69 pounds, living in the ICU of their hospital, couldn't put on weight to save her life. And basically that's what she needed to do. She needed to save her life. Her doctors were not giving her long to live. Like, they didn't think she'd live a year or two beyond that point when she was in the ICU. And she knew it. And so she convinced the nurse taking care of her and the people in the kitchen to just bring her meat. She just went completely carnivore right there in the ICU of the hospital, and started feeling better, putting on weight, getting healthier as a reduction of, yes, people go carnivore to lose weight. This wasn't about a fat gain weight. This was about her body was attacking itself. She had so many autoimmune markers going off in her body that her body wouldn't heal. It was constantly in a state of breaking down, and it couldn't heal. It was attacking itself nonstop. And so by going through that sort of elimination diet, where all of her nutrients came from meat, her body was able to heal itself, reduce the inflammation enough, stop setting off basically the autoimmune reaction of her immune system. Okay, so stopped attacking itself long enough for her to heal and grow. Now, when I interviewed her, she's a healthy 140 pounds, lifting weights, coaching other people, helping other people, passing on what she's come through, what she's learned to others. But from 69 to 140 pounds in just a matter of a few years, much healthier, vibrant, no longer autoimmune state. It's tremendous through a carnivore diet. So, and I've had a few other guests who came on. They met many other people as well who can't tolerate digesting plant foods, or they couldn't for a time. They went through a healing process and were able to, through the elimination diet, and now they can add in some other foods that allow them, that they can enjoy now. But for a time, they basically had to recover from wherever they were coming from. They were full carnivore. So again, keto, many people in the keto world will say, yeah, keto is maybe not something you maintain long periods. It's something that gets you through a period of healing, to overcome something, or greater aggressive weight loss if you want, overcome PCOS, get the metabolic hormones back in line. It's a therapy. It's a nutritional therapy, as is an elimination diet like carnivore, a nutritional therapy. Some people remain, and some people are better off there and happier there and feel fantastic there. Whether they're whether it's just about symptoms, terrible symptoms subsiding, like we just mentioned, or they just have more energy and feel like they just feel better. They just feel better, and it's a simpler diet for them. It's not, what carnivore is not, is a meat-loving cult. It's not some sort of like just a bunch of meat-loving people who like to get together and talk about meat and look at meat, post pictures of meat. And it's not about the worship of meat. It's about knowing. It's about knowing where nutrition comes from and what is optimal for our health. Yes, it's a super nutrient dense and enjoyable to eat. So we talk about it. I'm not calling myself a carnivore by any stretch. I've done carnivore stretches of like a couple of weeks or whatever. I've done it's a kind of animal based for sure, because I have plenty of other foods in my diet that I will tolerate it and enjoy. So I'm not calling myself a carnivore by any stretch, but definitely meat makes up the majority of what I eat. For sure. Meat, eggs, animal based. So meat, eggs, fish. I cook with lard. So it's just not all I eat, but it's a good portion of the majority of what I take in comes from an animal source. But it's out of a desire for optimal health. And like I said, many people come to it in a search of healing, as well as optimizing their health, and find their niche, or find their place, find that this is working for them better than anything else has. And then once it's tolerated many a time, we'll add other foods in that benefit them. So it could be fruit, it could be honey, dairy or fermented dairy, specifically tubers, rice, maybe some veggies, fermented foods, depending on what feels right to them, what adds, whether it benefits their lifestyle or quality of life for their own enjoyment. But generally eating, what they do add in is generally whole food, avoiding processed food. So right, foods from a box bag or a bottle that involve sugar, processed grains, and oils, some combination of those. Usually very minimal alcohol, if at all. Have you ever done a real low carb or carnivore or strongly animal based diet with very little starch? If you've done that, alcohol has a different effect on you. For some reason, it just doesn't. It's a little more potent. It might just make you tired. You don't feel as well the next day. You're just much more. I think we're just more sensitive to the effects of it, both on the front end, more so on the back end. It just isn't usually worth how you feel the next day, the grogginess, the brain fog, especially as we get older, especially if you're over 40 and you're doing this kind of diet. It's like alcohol's, for most, not everybody, for most, it's just like not as tolerated. That's tolerated. You don't feel so good. But generally, whole food, avoiding this processed food, and moving to a more animal-based approach. As I mentioned, like what I eat, animal foods is the primary source of nutrition, both macros and micronutrients, with a select group of side items that have benefit for a reason. Whether it's, you want to add some more magnesium and potassium and those kind of minerals that might be harder to get from meat sources into your food, or having fermented sources, just get the bacteria there. It's what feels right? You got to figure that out for yourself. And that's what I'm talking about here. It's like, what feels good to you? This is all in a search for optimal health for yourself, and understanding that it may not look exactly like what others are doing. And that's got to be okay. There has to be some individual nuance to it. That can change as needed over time, or as tolerated, if it's just something you want because you enjoy it. And now, after a period of healing or whatever case it is, or of just eliminating unnecessary foods or harmful foods, you want to enjoy that food again. Knowing, some sort of whole food, whether you're in love with tomatoes. You love tomatoes. Some people can't tolerate. They don't like nightshades. Some people are not bothered by the nightshades and they enjoy them. I personally can't eat the same foods I did, or maybe I can't eat them prepared the same way that I did 10 years ago. And for some, even 5 years ago. I just can't eat as much. For instance, like raw veggies started making me feel really bloated, like a salad, just simple. I'm not talking about eating broccoli raw, of course not, but like even lettuces and large amounts of salads and lettuces, which I would eat a lot of 10 years ago. With chunky, so we put, all sorts of onions and tomatoes and other things in there, and different types of greens, not just watery lettuces, but other kind of darker greens in there. And I just don't digest it well. But we steam something, cook something, or do fermented, like a lot of kimchi, and it's just, those are more easily tolerated for me. I digest them better, and I had to pay attention to realize that. I had to have an open mind about vegetables and how maybe I should be ingesting them, or what would be a better way to ingest them, to realize, rather than just ingesting them based on belief and not paying attention to the side effects. And it's not uncommon. People become dogmatic, as often the case, especially when something's new, or they may feel especially defensive or protective about their decision. And like they have to defend it by sometimes attacking others, or being just super dogmatic and enclosed. Like, this is the only way to do it, right? We know those people. Some people just like to be that way. It's not, it's present, but it's not as typical. It's not part of the overall culture in the animal-based community. People are usually looking for answers, and they're sharing what they've tried, both good and bad, that work for them, but allowing everyone to be on their own journey and have their own result, have their own knowing. We have a same baseline of understanding of the benefits of an animal-based diet, where nutrients come from, right? The most of our bioavailable nutrients come from, which would be the majority of our nutrient source, right? But allowing people to have that, again, the nuance, right? Quite the opposite of what you might see in a vegan community, right? Or a vegetarian community, where some people are actually, it's pretty common. People are quick to attack, even name calling, threatening, whether they're within their community, or without. So people who eat meat regularly, you might see them on social media calling them murderers, or you see them, hunting, or they see them, making comments. I've seen some pretty mean comments come out from vegans towards people, even wishing death on people, because equating that with death of a human to death of an animal somehow, because they ate meat, or also, of course, we see this quite often, ostracizing those who go from being vegan or vegetarian to eating meat again, as if it's some personal attack on them as a vegan, that someone decided, hey, this doesn't work for me, I'm going to do something else, I'm going to eat a different way. And they take it personally, rather than the personal choice of that other individual. So it's treated almost like a cult, really. I think it's a cult, a religion, that if you walk away from it, or you even and whether you've been a part of it or not, somehow defy that, you are a personal affront to them, as if it's like a moral standard, as opposed to a choice for optimal health or search for optimal health in the way we're supposed to eat. That is, historically accurate, historically the way humans have eaten, looking back thousands of years on record. And I've met many people who went from vegan or vegetarian, or who practiced it at some point in their life, who are now animal-based. And I personally did for 3.5 years in my 20s, long ago, in my 20s. So was a vegetarian, and to certain stretches, it was vegan. It was not for the purpose of saving animals. It was about being, looking for optimal health, as many have. I've tried it for that reason. And I gave it a good shot. I was eating black beans and rice and making my own almond milk, because we didn't have almond milk in the stores back then, at least not everywhere, maybe in a few places, but blending up almonds and trying to eat as much nuts and beans as I could to get protein. Wasn't enough. I ended up getting sick. It was just not a great experience, but it took time for me to realize that. So we have to let people walk out their own health journey. Certainly, if you're going to provide insight or advice, what you're doing in a way that is not threatening or dogmatic. But let them figure out what they need for their optimal health and their quality and enjoyment of life, without being personally threatened in our own choices. And in letting other people, progress forward at their own pace, we also give ourselves room. We allow ourselves to adjust as is appropriate over time, always learning, always paying attention to what our bodies are telling us then about what we're eating, about how we're sleeping, about what things that we need to change and adjust to get to the point where we're all trying to get to, which is finding some optimal health. Again, it's a moving target, and we learn in layers or levels. We can layer in some change and make that a constant or a lifestyle, a habit that is normal and natural, control natural. And then we allow ourselves to level up, and then we can always add a little more change, and layer in a little bit more change, to allow ourselves to progress, to grow, to learn, to pay attention, where what was good for us 5 years ago may not be good for us now. Not that it was bad, but it was just our bodies can change, or we layer in progress. And it may be seasonal. It may be, in other words, don't paint yourself in a box. Don't paint others in a box and say, this is what I am, so I'm going to be. Allow people to live and learn and grow at their pace in their journey, just as you would want to, just as you have. And allow yourself to do the same, because what you think you know now may not be what you know or experiencing 5 years from now, 10 years from now, as your body gets older. Or as, again, you've got enough change layered in that you're able to troubleshoot and fine tune and adjust, or you allow your body to heal from where it had come from before, and now different things are tolerated that were not before, because your gut has healed, or your immune system has healed, and you're hormonally balanced, and you can trust what your body's telling you and pay more attention to that. Have a great week.